All right. Haven't done it in a while, so this one is going to be about quantum mechanics and miracles and what the connection might be. So, the miracles of Jesus Christ, I have the Wikipedia page up here, are quite numerous. And the interesting thing is that you have all the Gospels, and you also have accounts by people who didn't even maybe like the guy, or with other religions, as of course Jesus wasn't actually Christian. Christianity didn't exist at the time, but you have all these accounts from all kinds of different people about the miracles, and atheists want to just blindly deny the guy even existed, or if he existed, the story isn't the way it was told. And I actually used to fall into that group. But as I read more and more of the history and mythology behind these different religions, I'm not saying that any of it is precisely factual, but it's worth considering and reading all of it and seeing, what it's saying. And thinking about, well, what if it was true? What are the implications? How could it have been true scientifically? And it takes a lot of spiritual wherewithal to think about that. And something like as simple as turning water into wine. And thermodynamically, water can turn into wine, but it would have to be a rearrangement of that configuration of energy into a different one. So there's this famous story, and I can't find it right now, but Einstein's walking in the middle of the street. I think he's talking to Bohr or one of these other physicists he's buddies with, and Bohr says something. He comes to the realization that quantum mechanics means that a car could just appear in front of them randomly, and and hit them or whatever. It could just drop out of nowhere, materialize from nowhere, because effectively in quantum mechanics, there's probabilities for everything, but for the most part, the idea that something wouldn't happen macroscopically is merely just a very, 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 very small percentage chance that it wouldn't. And that's why you have, the quantum vacuum isn't empty. There's particles popping in and out. So I have this, I have this idea about the miracles that happen, like turning water into wine, and what might have really occurred if these miracles are indeed factual. I personally believe that there's some grain of truth to it. And it comes from consider this idea. Imagine you could manipulate quantum randomness. So if quantum mechanics is truly reality, right? I know there's all these different interpretations, many worlds, Copenhagen interpretation, all these different interpretations, but imagine the idea that at the bottom level of reality, the physical rules, that there is randomness. You have to decide what happens in an interaction, and nature has to, flip a coin. Has to choose either the left one or the right branch. So you could look at reality then as a giant tree. And this is what they mean by the many worlds, is that you constantly have reality essentially splitting based on the choices that can be made. Well, an interaction's happening, and it can be this way or it can be that way. And wave function collapse happens, and you might be in this universe, or you could be in the one on the right. But effectively, how many collapses are happening every second that you're alive? How many are you aware of? Are you around? How many go into the information that your brain takes up? The brain takes in about 2,000 bits per second. The conscious mind takes in about 50 bits per second. And, that's downsampled from the richness of the information of the world. Whatever light cone is around you, the brain and the body is only taking in so much, and the conscious mind is even taking in, less. So whatever the quantum nature of reality is, there's a whole different quantum nature of consciousness, or just the perspective of being alive. So being a object that does take measurements in order to exist. That's all you really do, is your measurement device. But in any case, if we just talk about objective reality now, right, we talk about everything is essentially at the bottom level being decided based on coin flips. What if you could bias some coin flips? What if you could bias just one? Could you change water into wine? How about 2? How about 10, 100, 1,000? How many small changes to what would effectively be a Gaussian distribution or a random distribution, how many small changes do you need to create a large change, i.e. a miracle? Now, I don't know the answer to that, but it seems reminiscent to me of the kind of principle at the back of the story of Star Wars. Yes, it's a space opera. Yes, there's all this funny technological weird alien bullshit happening, but the idea of the force, that you can influence it, the force that pervades the universe and that you can influence it, is a pretty interesting and beautiful one. And it may actually be true. It may be reality. So perhaps you and I are so uncouth, we're so untrained, we don't know how to manipulate what would be deemed luck effectively, right? Quantum, if you think about it, if reality is indeterministic, then really the way those flips happen, the way they go, right, the way the dice roll, is your luck. At least the flips that surround you, that affect you. Yes, you could say that, what's happening in Alpha Centauri will eventually influence you, the butterfly effect. But, for the most part, those flips that end up affecting you, those are the important ones, right? Those are effectively determining your luck. Now, if you could even bias a couple of those, of course, if we're talking about quantum physics, billions and billions of interactions that end up collapsing wave functions happening all the time. And we go back, right? I'm gonna Google this right now. There's Eugene Wigner consciousness theory of quantum mechanics. And the idea was that there's a causal chain in measurement. So quantum mechanics doesn't really define what measurement is. That's the real enigma, right? What is a measurement? But and that's actually what caused these theories to appear. So it's called von Neumann-Wigner interpretation. I have the page up now. Also described as consciousness causes collapse of the wave function. And the idea, you have this causal chain from a measurement device to the actual phenomena, right? And any part of it could be what collapses the wave function. It could be the actual interaction, right, of whatever the measuring device is, or it could be, for example, scientist, right, has a photon detector. Photon hits the film or electrophorescent, device, and that sends a signal, and then it prints out a paper. It says a photon received, right? Now, is it the devices, when the device interacts with the photon, when it hits the electronic, assembly, or is it when you read the paper, when the scientist reads the paper? When is it, that the collapse happens? So that was the idea behind the interpretation, that consciousness causes the collapse, because anywhere along this causal chain from scientist or observer to phenomena, you have the device in the middle, the measurement device in the middle, and as well as a person's measurement device. And, you really don't know which one it is. Well, anyways, it's now commonly thought that collapse of the wave function that ruins coherency happens without any conscious intervention. Now, we still haven't ever defined consciousness, really. That's the big question of our time. Is pantheism correct? Is the whole universe conscious? Is every little particle, the table? Because if that's the case, then yes, consciousness does cause collapse, because consciousness is everything. But now it's commonly thought that just any kind of interaction will cause collapse. Anything that uses that observable, anything that uses that measurement value. So if it hits into something, there's an interaction. That other thing that hits it, uses the value, because what happens next, to that thing depends on, what it hit and so on. So that's why it's very, very hard to keep these qubits and these quantum assemblies, anything using, quantum phenomena. It's very hard to keep the wave function from collapsing, because any kind of stray particle, any kind of anything that interacts will usually cause collapse. So that consciousness argument kind of went the wayside. I brought that up because when we're talking about consciousness, we're talking about you and me being able to influence wave function collapse, being able to influence which choice, the choice function, or might be termed in mathematics, it's called you have a choice function, axiom of choice, choosing something from a random set, maybe even an infinite set or an infinite family of sets, and we don't know. Einstein didn't even think God threw dice, and we don't know if God does throw dice, and if he does, we don't know how he throws the dice, how he chooses. We can go into randomness and algorithmic randomness, and that's a whole wormhole, but we won't go there. But back to the subject at hand. If a person can influence the quantum wave function collapses around them, quantum phenomena, to bias it, even let's say it's normally a 50-50 between spin up and spin down, and they can change it to 60-40, right? How much change is necessary? How much bias is necessary to cause miracles to happen? I don't have the answer to that question, but I think it's beautiful, the idea, and I think it has some salt. Now, just forgetting what I was going to go over before then. So we have luck. Okay, so it's possible Jesus Christ was effectively some type of Jedi. Like, he was able to influence the flips so much, so bias, so many, which may not even be a lot. It may just be 10 qubits get changed, and from heads to tails, from spin up to spin down, just 10 get changed or something in a space of a microsecond, or was it femtosecond, and boom, water into wine. You just have to nucleate the process, right? A lot of things, all you need to do is nucleate you just have to cause a nucleation, some type of asymmetry to push to an equilibrium state, and then it goes all the way over. So I really don't know what the threshold is, but I do believe that if we're talking about miracles, and miracles actually happen, I would say that's the way they occurred, and that's why the business of miracles is so complex. People ask, well, why didn't he do this? Why didn't he just clap his hands and just kill every Roman that was in front of him? Well, he wanted to die. That's the answer. But aside from that, people ask a lot of things about the miracles. Why weren't they done in this way or that way? They were sort of they were done in sort of a lay way, and layman's type of miracle. It wasn't like he was just God and all powerful. He was a man who was God. But if you ask me my belief, I think he was saying that everyone's God. He's saying we're all sons of God. So it wasn't like he was saying he's special necessarily. He was just willing to die for it. That's the difference. Most people aren't willing to die for their beliefs. So the question is, how would you or I manifest something like this? And that's what I almost forgot before. And that brings me to the next related topic, synchronicity, Carl Jung. So synchronicity is a concept first introduced by Carl Jung that holds that events are meaningful coincidences. So meaning there's no causal relationship between some events, but yet there would be a meaningful relation. So here's an example. It's this plum pudding example. So this French writer is a very famous little anecdote about, that kind of describes synchronicity. French writer Émile Deschamps claims in his memoirs that in 1805 he was treated to some plum pudding by a stranger named Monsieur de Fontainebeau. 10 years later, the writer encountered plum pudding on the menu of a Paris restaurant and wanted to order some. But the waiter told him that the last dish had already been served to another customer who turned out to be de Fontainebeau. Many years later, in 1832, Deschamps was at dinner and once again ordered the plum pudding. Well, he recalled the earlier incident, told his friends that the only thing that was missing was de Fontainebeau. And in the same instant, the now elderly Fontainebeau entered the room having got the wrong address. So it's just crazy coincidence, first time he's introduced to the plum pudding, it's with this guy, and he can't get it because that guy ordered the last plum pudding. He's in a totally different restaurant many years later, and he orders the plum pudding, and of course this guy's there because that guy got the wrong address. I mean, what's the odds you have all these things happen? In a lot of these situations that people would term coincidences, probabilities would be extremely hard to calculate. And some people, with the pocket protectors and everything, will try to compute what the probability is, but you need to know the priors. You can't just compute the probabilities by taking the events as independent and multiplying all the independent probabilities. It just doesn't give the right value, and especially for things that have this level of I guess very descriptive kind of events that don't have easy kind of mathematical descriptions. So things, there's a lot of interesting things that have happened in my life personally that I used to think, okay, I used to be very much an atheist and very much what I see is what is, and almost like I subscribe to the physicality of the universe, the objective physicality, sort of the 4D space-time that, space-time and events are just it's just this big structure, and we're at time here and we'll eventually be here, and you can sort of just look at the structure as stretched out through time, sort of like a spline. You take a shape and you pull it around, and then you get, another dimension. Well, take space-time and you pull it through time, and then you get an object, right? And I don't think that's the case anymore, based on what's happened to me. I won't get into what's happened to me, but there's just been so many things that made me realize that there's sort of an eerie nature to just experience of life. And I'm sure maybe there's people who haven't had that, and maybe they haven't noticed it, because a lot of these things you have to look for. I mean, like who looks at the numbers on their dollar bills. I just saw a thread on Reddit. Some guy looked at the numbers on his serial number on his $1 bill and saw it was all sevens. You know, and the chance of that is apparently 1 in 11 million to have, you know, all the same number. 1111, 2, and apparently he also had J and L as the letters on the bill, and those can be like, there's 10 different letters, so you have 100 different combinations of those, and an L is a 7 upside down, and then sort of a J is pretty similar in that respect. I mean, yeah, you have to bend things a little, but it's just weird that he, you know, he had this bill and looked for it and found it. I've never even looked at the serial numbers on any of my money, even though my father collected coins. I just don't do that. But now that I've sort of, I guess you open yourself to looking at sort of these things that you normally would consider random. Hey, it's just, you know, it's just a set of priors. There's only, you know, 100 million bills, and for you to select one, it's 1 in 11 million. But if you think of life as sort of you having a dance with the universe, it's not surprising then that there may be some of these quantum these qubits, these quantum wave function collapses, that maybe go a little the other way, a little tiny bias, just to fuck with you, just to say, hey, I'm here. Hey, you know, this isn't just, so you're not just a flesh robot, and there's no mystery here. It's not just all for nothing, you little piece of shit on a rock floating in space. There's a little mysticism here. Something's a little mystic. I'm fucking with you a little bit. It's not like he's gonna part the clouds and come show you a miracle like some of these people think. That's what they think a miracle is. You know, that clear supposition, support, you know, support for God existing. He comes down and says, hey, I am here. You know, that's not gonna happen. It's not that obvious. That's not subtle. You think nature is going to be a subtle piece of shit? I like memes. I like PewDiePie. I watch his videos occasionally because they make me laugh. I like the intellectual kind of just the playfulness of the memes. They take things and they turn them on their heads. Like you wouldn't. They're surprising. That's what makes memes funny, is that you never know what you're going to get. And so when people say, oh, well, if God existed, it would be obvious. And, you know, and when I talk about God, I said this in my previous videos, I'm not talking about Abrahamic God. I'm not talking about a guy pulling strings or a guy who, you know, moves every molecule, the great animator. Although, you know, nature does push physics forward, pushes the arrow of time. But, I just mean God as like Jordan Peterson talks about, like the maximum what you believe, whatever supports this universe, whatever keeps it running, that's God. Whether you call it nature, whether you call it physics, whether you call it pure energy, whatever you subscribe to, the fact is that entity, if it has some agency, some free agency to show inhabitants of its creation, or maybe itself, right? Some people think that, and I actually kind of believe this too, that the universe is God. It's not like there's God outside and he made the universe. I mean, it is God. Nature, this is nature. And so there doesn't need to be something outside of it. You know, we're a piece of it. We're a piece of God. Thus we are, you know, we are all one. We are all of God. Pieces of matter, pieces of energy resonating at a certain frequency, electromagnetic radiation, and all the other fields. So I think the idea that God's going to come down and make himself shown, do some crazy outlandish miracle is just total ludicrousness. It's just so blind and ignorant to think that, first of all, that God doesn't have a sense of humor. Nature doesn't have. I think that's what synchronicity is. The eerie coincidences and sort of what should be random has personal significance. That is the one universal aesthetic. Some kind of sense of humor about eeriness and mysticism. That nature doesn't announce itself as being there and omnipresent, but sort of hints at it. So there's always a doubt. Like, I'm not even sure. There's always a doubt in your mind. And that's what keeps things interesting. I don't know why people think that it should be such a brutish kind of, I'm here. I mean, even Jesus himself, who performed the miracles, didn't do anything so ridiculous that it couldn't still be denied 2,000 years later. So, so that, you know, that's my take. I think luck and quantum randomness and miracles and sort of communicating with the universe, or I guess understanding that there's an effect you can have in terms of the way that the dice roll, is part of life. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Leave a comment, subscribe. Later.